Hello and good day to you all wherever you may be. It's a real pleasure to be announcing today a session where I will be pleased to act as moderator. My name is Akinmade Emejulu. I'm joining you from Geneva, Switzerland, and I'm joining you today on behalf of the Global Fashion Agenda Copenhagen Fashion Summit 2020. And specifically, we're looking in this session at redesigning value, looking beyond shareholder value. We're really pleased that you chose this particular breakout session to join, and we are looking forward to a really exciting discussion in the next 30 minutes. A few housekeeping rules just before I move on and introduce the panelists. We want to let you know we will be recording this live, and it will be hosted on the Global Fashion Agenda's website after this event. The other suggestion really is that you please use this opportunity to make it interactive. There's opportunities to put in comments, questions, ideas into the chat box, and they will be seen in a back room where somebody is working magic, and I promise you can see them and can feed them to me so that we make this panel happen. So don't be alarmed if you're not seeing your questions pop up. Somebody is seeing them and will send them through. So with that, I will introduce the wonderful panelists that we have joining us today to talk about, once again, redesigning value and looking beyond shareholder value. The first panelist is Marissa Pagnani McGowan. She's Senior Vice President of Corporate Responsibility at PVH Core, the organization behind Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein. And she will be talking to us really about the emerging construct of stakeholder capitalism in the context of the fashion sector, and really how do we extend the range of actors who we consider stakeholders. Second, I have with me Dr. Sally Uren, OBE. She's the Chief Executive of Forum for the Future. That is an international sustainability nonprofit that's working with businesses, they're working with governments, they're working with civil society to explore how the fashion sector can accelerate its sustainable intentions and its sustainability objectives. Last but not least, I have Sakis Kotsantonis, who is the managing partner at KKS Advisors. That is a strategy consulting firm focused specifically on the fashion industry. And just to check that, we have indeed Marissa, Sally, and Sakis with us.
Yes, hi.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you very much. So because we're short on time for this, I'm going to really just go directly into the meat of this discussion. And we talked about earlier, this is the panelist you're seeing here. We had a discussion earlier about the IMF's Christine Lagarde's former managing director, describing the work of the IMF as requiring a mixture of heart, of brain, and of wallet, putting together financial resources, intellectual capital, and a corporate sort of citizenship, a corporate care to the work they do. And we said, doesn't this have applications for the work of redesigning value in the fashion sector? And we believed that it did, and we thought that would be a great way to frame this discussion and to explore as a filter all the nuances we plan to pick up during this session. And so with that in mind, I'll go first to the other key point for us, I think, just to emphasize, is that the global fashion agenda has done great work to show that the sustainability trajectory for 2030 is not promising in the fashion sector because of the growth of the sector and because of the current practices. And so given there's this, desire to be sustainable, to work within planetary boundaries, to make sure that there's prosperity and it doesn't come at the cost of human well-being, we need to rethink the desire and the need to have more stakeholders included in a prosperous model and a prosperous fashion of the future, fashion sector of the future. And how do we finance this is another key part of this discussion. It's all well and good to have these intentions, but the financing is really, really critical. So with that, I want to hand first to Marissa, who will speak to the sort of wallet and brain elements. And the opening question I will have for you, Marissa, to cover this is, who are these wider fashion stakeholders in the emerging construct of shareholder capitalism?
Thank you, Daniel, so much. And thank you to Global Fashion Agenda for having us and putting on a panel on this critical topic this is very timely, I believe. So to start with, I would say anyone within a company that's running a corporate responsibility program or is closely involved with the corporate responsibility efforts or sustainability efforts of their organization is going to be dealing with a wide range of stakeholders. So just to give you a bit of an example, we have internal and external stakeholders that we're thinking about all the time. So internally, it's not a small or mighty, group of passionate people within an organization that drive change. It's your colleagues in the executive group with a vision. It's our board of directors in terms of oversight. It's our supply chain colleagues who are driving so much of the change in the part of our value chain where impact is most intense. It's our sales and merchandising teams as they think about what a consumer wants and how we're going to most effectively engage with them. It's our marketing teams and it's our design and product development teams. So you've got this whole ecosystem, and I'm probably forgetting many of them. You've got a really large internal ecosystem. I would be remiss if I didn't shout out, my finance and accounting colleagues who audit every data point we put out in reporting. Our human resources teams who are driving so much of what we're doing internally around inclusion and diversity. So you've got this huge internal ecosystem of stakeholders that you want to be managing and working with in order to drive real systemic and sustainable change within your organization. Externally, you have a whole nother group of actors where you're looking at, for us, we license some of our products. So we have to make sure that the same values that flow through our own products flow through our licensed products. You have your suppliers who are a critical partner in terms of helping you to develop technology, innovation, and the products we want to bring with production processes that match those values and targets we've set. You have civil society who we're engaged with probably daily in different regards to push us forward, to help us learn, to find issues within the supply chain, challenge our thinking. Governments, industry associations, investors, all of these groups make up this ecosystem of internal and external stakeholders that we are regularly engaging with and trying to design, learn from, and contribute to the change we want to see. What I would say in this new construct, as we're talking about stakeholder capitalism, these aren't new stakeholders, right? I mean, we've had to answer to investors and communities and suppliers. That's not new. I think the difference is moving from a risk management model where we did what we did because we thought it was the right thing to do. We thought it was better for business, and we believed we could, help move our company and our industry in the right direction. So we're doing that maybe behind the scenes. I think now there's much more opportunity to engage. So I'm moving from a risk management to an engagement model. And I think sometimes we talk about opportunity. I prefer to say engagement. I think there's more interest and willingness to engage with our consumers, our financial institutions, our investment community in a different way. And our suppliers, honestly, I think it's a way that takes a better understanding of how business and sustainability are inherently linked. I'll give you one example. If we want to have a demand-driven model, that's good for business. It's great for sustainability, right? We don't want excess inventory. We don't want to carry that as a company. We also don't want to carry that as a member of this ecosystem in this society. So I hope I answered the question, but I did want to start with sort of the current ecosystem that we've been engaging with and historically been engaged with. Think about a maturity model that's moving us from doing things maybe behind the scenes and from a risk mitigation perspective into more of an opportunity and engagement. And in this realm, I'm particularly excited about our work with governments, because I think we as business have a critical role to play. We believe we have a big responsibility to drive the change we want to see. We also believe, though, that we cannot do this alone. So that ecosystem we've established with civil society and governments, it's really figuring out, can the policies incentivize the behavior we want to see? In talking differently with our financial institutions or investors, are we speaking in a language that resonates with them, where you're getting the sustainability and financial benefits of our actions? So I hope that opens it up all right.
You certainly did open it up well, and I take from that a lot of brain power in working with various stakeholders, internal and external, and seeing where it makes sense to continue to develop policies and incentives that promote sustainable outcomes. And I also see the wallet power there in saying, look, this also makes sense financially. Who wants to have excess inventory? That doesn't do well for even just our financing, and seeing the engagement opportunities around that. So it's not just incidental or tactical, it's strategic. So thank you very much. And we will come back to those points. If we can pivot now to the heart and to Dr. Sally. And Dr. Sally, in your context at Forum for the Future, looking across all these stakeholder groups, and particularly businesses, I guess, because they are the core of this conversation. What are sort of the practical steps that you've seen companies can take or want to take to emerge into this capitalism 2.0, a more responsible capitalism, given this moment we're in 2020?
Thank you very much, and thank you, CFS, for the opportunity to take part today. It's great to be here. Practical steps that companies can take to pivot to capitalism 2.0. I think there are at least 8, and I wanted to share with you that 8-point plan, if you will. And if you're listening carefully to the first letter I use as I describe this, it creates an acronym. And there'll be a prize if you can figure it out. You probably won't be able to, but anyway, it'll just make sure you pay attention. So the first thing that I think organizations can do to pivot to capitalism 2.0 is a P, and that is P for purpose. I think it's really critical that organizations have an inspiring and credible change-making purpose. And that for fashion organizations could be framed around providing sustainable fashion in a way that puts more back into society and the economy than we take out, more back into the environment. So sort of net positive framing around that purpose. But the purpose could go even further. It could be a purpose around restoration, of regeneration of supply chains. And that is really exciting because we know that we need to do more than just being less bad. But the purpose also could work at a lower level. It could be around creating fair and resilient supply chains. So that's the first action, P for purpose. Number 2, A is for ambitious 2030 sustainability targets. Every organization needs a set of these goals, strategic pillars, and they need to be super ambitious, and they should definitely include a number that are currently unachievable, because that will stretch innovation and stretch the imagination. Number 3, T is for transparency. We need greater transparency across the value chains. We need to make sure we publicly disclose sustainability data, which will allow other shareholders, stakeholders to really understand how to drive greater performance. E is for end procurement practices that only focus on extracting maximum value at minimum cost, and shift to models that are actually about creating value, particularly environmental and societal value, encouraging regeneration across the supply chain. That's number 4. Number 5, D is for decarbonize, decarbonize, decarbonize. We need to strip out fossil-based fuels out of supply chains and ensure that all the energy that we use is from renewable sources. Number 6, S, for scale circular practices, scale sustainable alternatives to raw materials that have got a heavy environmental footprint. Number 7, A, absolutely agree with Marissa. A is for advocate with governments, for bolder policy frameworks, for bolder action to really drive the change we need to see in this industry, encouraging higher standards of regulation. So A is for advocate with governments. And then again, echoing Marissa's opening point, Number 8 is G, and that's galvanize the entire sector behind groundbreaking solutions. So that's the wider ecosystem, it's civil society, and it's investors. So that's my 8-point plan. If you're paying attention, that actually spells Padasag, which is not a real word, but it's an acronym for Pagaste, which means to pay to settle up. And so this is a plan that we can settle it with nature and society to really ensure a different form of capitalism that works not just for the economy, but for nature and society.
Thank you very much for that, Sally. I think that really does capture it all. If anybody comes up with anything that is not included, I will be personally and professionally surprised. I really like the idea of ambition that is seemingly unachievable, because it then stretches companies, stakeholders to do more than they would have otherwise done. And I think that, when you talk about the need to galvanize and decarbonize, these are really urgent calls in 2020. If I can just do a quick follow-up question for you, why do you think there's urgency to do this now? Is it really about doing it from the heart? Are there other motivations companies can stand on to take these 8-point plans?
The reason why now is the time to do this is very much related to the time we find ourselves in. COVID has disrupted absolutely everything. It's transforming the very systems that we rely on. On the one hand, that is deeply disconcerting, it's really unsettling, it's got huge negative impacts. However, this is a major moment of systems transformation. And because everything is shifting around us, then actually adopting this 8-point plan right now could actually deliver systemic change and deliver the emergence of the systems that we know we need to solve for climate, address structural inequalities, and transform the economy. So now is the time we need to do this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Sakis, you were involved in a study at KKS Advisory that looked at the Business Roundtable and was featured quite prominently in the New York Times. And I guess the takeaway around that was the virtue of ESG reporting, and really looking at the extent to which ESG reporting has intentions and it also has outcomes. And sometimes intentions don't always match outcomes. So in the spirit of talking to that as another aspect of this 3-part dichotomy wallet, what are the takeaways there? People want to invest in ESG outcomes, but sometimes it's not always as they imagine. What are the takeaways?
Thank you, Daniel. First of all, thank you for inviting me to participate. This has been fascinating already. I'm going to try to bring the first letter on Sal's acronym, the purpose, with the maturity model that Marissa was describing, and assuming that not all companies are within that frame of maturity where practices are diffused across the company. So what we do know is that to issue a public announcement where you pledge that you serve all stakeholders in a purpose-driven company is probably the easiest thing to do. Few people understand what that means or how to actually measure a company's success in delivering on that purpose. So who's to hold you accountable? And in all likelihood, unless things go really wrong, you can keep on doing what you were doing without major repercussions. But here comes 2020, and as Sally has just describing, things changed a lot, right? So we have the global pandemic, we have a make or break here that companies that claim to be purpose-driven, taking care of their employees, their supply chains, and so on. So we need to test how they respond in a moment of crisis, especially with respect to relationships between employers and employees and business and society. And for too long, we didn't have the data to do that. And that it was a data problem. We didn't know how to follow progress, but we're slowly getting there. And what we did is we actually analyzed a sample of companies from the S&P 500 and FTSE Euro First indices. And we used data from a data company called True Value Labs. And we used as a measure of corporate purpose businesses that, as you said, signed up for the roundtable statement on purpose of the corporation. So that happened in 2019, and a lot of big companies signed up declaring that they will protect the interest of all stakeholders. Their statements immediately hit the headlines. They had the 180 CEOs backing this up. It was equally fast that the headlines from our research came through, because what we found is that to be a signatory is not enough. It signals intention, but unfortunately, when we start tracking what you have done, especially right now where things are still developing, evolving, and you have the opportunity to actually show how you fulfill that purpose, you not follow through with actions. So number one thing that we found is that there was no real relationship between companies signaling and companies acting. We also found that companies that have a consistent positive track record of effectively managing those issues, and we looked back 5 years before the crisis, they continued along the same lines. They actually remained faithful to their promises to protect their employees, protect their supply chains, protect their business models, and so on. And that study was across sectors, so there was no industry or sector bias. But I do want to keep a few positive notes there, right? There's a lot of companies that do very well, and there's a lot of companies that reached out to us and they said, you missed the point because there's more that we do that is not being communicated through our reporting. And Marissa touched on that, on the effort to report. So one of the things that I do want to emphasize and kind of like live with companies out there is that, in a sense, you need to take control of the ESG data narrative and communicate the material issues across stakeholders. This doesn't have to be just your investors, but don't just wait third-party providers, raters, and so on to describe your business model accurately if you're not going through that effort. Now, because as I said, we have evolved a lot, there's a lot more information that you need to share. How do you create value for stakeholders? Where's the performance data? Sally spoke about ambition. Where's your targets? How do you meet your targets? How is the board overseeing performance on your purpose? Is this aligned with corporate strategy? And so on. So, the key point here is that companies that do well, they don't do well by chance. It's a conscious effort over time, and this needs to be communicated.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're coming into our final 10 minutes. And so I just want to pose some questions that I think have fed well into this, that will feed well into this discussion. And then we can open it up for a wider sort of interaction. And my first question really is to you, Sally, and it's really thinking about how plausible is it that companies will build back better? There's a lot of discussion around this moment and the need to build back better for what comes after the pandemic. How plausible is that? And in the fashion sector specifically, who do you think will help to determine new stakeholders in redesigning value?
Thank you. Yeah, I think building back better is both plausible and possible. To understand how plausible, I think we need to understand the different pathways that are emerging right now out of this crisis. And that's something that we've been looking at for the last few months at Forum for the Future. And we can see a number of different pathways emerging, each characterized by a slightly different mindset. So there is a pathway that we're calling compete and retreat. That's the continued rise of nationalism. The mindset there is that there isn't enough to go around. We need to look after our own. There's a trajectory called discipline, which is a mindset of actually public health protection comes first. We will use surveillance to make sure that we keep our individual citizens safe. And then there's a trajectory called transform, which is characterized by the mindset of planetary health equals human health equals economic health. And this is a trajectory where we see the scaling of new business models, the scaling of regenerative agriculture. We see the widening out of the values of the economic system to include environmental and social value creation. The point is that all three are emerging simultaneously, and how plausible building back better for fashion will depend on how much attention we pay to that transform trajectory, how well we can embrace that mindset of planetary health does equal human health, does equal economic health, and understanding that even if we find ourselves in discipline, heavy tech controlled trajectory, strong government intervention, even if we find ourselves in compete and retreat, the rise of nationalism, the breaking down of multilateralism, by understanding the mindsets that are in these different possible trajectories, we can then plot a pathway to transform. So if we pay attention to transform, if we ensure that everything we do is aligned with a transform trajectory, if we hold that mindset, planetary health equals human health equals economic health, then I think building back better is very plausible.
Thank you very much. And just in picking up on two of the things you said, the rise of nationalism, the breakdown of multilateralism. Marissa, if I were to ask you, there's a moment now where people are realizing the need to future-proof against so many shocks, against so many risks and potential disasters even. And it's been, I think, highlighted by all the headlines of 2020, the pandemic, racial inequality, human rights, climate change. What needs to be done for this future-proofing to happen, and for these steps to be taken to make good progress on all those fronts?
Well, I'll start by saying, I think we all came into 2020, and whether it was the UN or many partnerships within the fashion space, all talking about the decade of action. Maybe the last decade we were getting more aware of the issues, the interconnectivity of the issues. We were figuring out what that means for our different businesses and how we could set targets and take actions. This coming into 2020, we said this is the decade of action, and obviously COVID-19 came in and put a wrench in many plans, and obviously made us step back and ask ourselves a lot of questions as society. I would say, in terms of the future-proofing piece, I think what we've seen with COVID on the sustainability side is certainly an acceleration, and lots of different theories as to why that's happening now. Is it because, as Sally mentioned, the fragility of our systems? Is it, as Sakis mentioned, we now have better data and can hold ourselves accountable in different ways? Is it because we want to have agency when so much is going on around us? Is it because we want to use our wallets to reflect the values and change we want to see in the world? For whatever reason, we are seeing a real acceleration in sustainability trends with COVID. And I think a lot of what we had been on the path to do as an industry, it was the right start, but maybe we're looking to sort of raise all the ships at once in an incremental way. It now feels like someone hit the fast forward button on a number of the initiatives that we thought we could do, but now feels like it has to happen. It has to happen if we want to engage our associates within our companies. It has to happen if we want to work, and engage with our consumers in a meaningful way. So what is that thing? What is that thing? And I think the thing that will accelerate is we could take Sally's 8-part plan. I could point to any of those, I think, but really, I think we've seen things like the ILO call to action on garment workers. The great thing, and we were, as PVH, very active in the beginning of that coming together, was first you got to double down by the companies saying, yes, we're going to pay for our goods in progress. Second was, let's see what capital is out there, being financed through the system that we could access for the purposes of ensuring, less impact on our supply chains and the communities that are around them. Third thing was, how do we do this differently in the future? Really, we do not want to be in this situation again. So how do we make sure we have a work stream within this and a commitment by the companies up front to say, we do not want to end up in places with social systems and protections that do not exist, so that we are left scrambling. This was as much a business continuity issue as doing the right thing, protecting our suppliers and their communities. So I think you see examples like that where we're seeing, okay, we have an immediate need and we have a recognition that there's a challenge within the system that we want to address. Last thing is same with biodiversity, regenerative materials, and the like.
Thank you very much, Marissa. I think that's not very comprehensive overview that I would not want to be in your situation now, Sakis, to add to that. But if I may still put you on the spotlight, in the last 4 minutes we have, could you just tell us some key financing sources for how this agenda could happen? It's great to have the right motivations, heart, brain, wallet. It's great to meet the moment, but how can this be financed? Is it things like the Adidas bond, sustainability bond? Is it insurance? Is it long-term sources of capital? How can this be financed?
This is a great question, because all this, in order to do all this, we need money, right? In its finance, and there is, depending on where you are, you're a startup or a mature organization, we could be talking about different options. But I'm going to focus on 2 or 3 very specific things. One is growth capital and private equity. So what we have seen is that growth equity, traditional private equity firms are increasingly getting interested in financing some of these solutions. I know that the Carlyle Group, which is a major private equity firm, has made an investment in a machinery company in the fashion industry, and it was the first that kind of investment in the fashion supply chain. And also, I want to emphasize options that are within the ESG debt financing front, and this could be green bonds, sustainability, social bonds, sustainability link bonds, and so on. So there's different financial instruments right now that are very useful, because they emphasize how much of a strategic priority your corporate sustainability is. It improves the visibility to the initiatives that you're having from investors and the general public. But it also requires a level of sophistication on the metrics to actually select projects and also track performance against those projects. So in a sense, it gives a lot more transparency in the market. And I have seen, as you said, the Adidas is one example that's a very successful issuance. There has been more examples in the market. There's the Prada example, where they did a deal with Crédit Agricole for, I think it's a 5-year, 50 million sustainability linked loan. And that is related against certain sustainability targets. So the mechanisms are getting there, and the interest in this type of financing are increasing over time. Actually, the market for sustainability linked loans.
Sorry, just to respond to that, I hope that if there are private equity investors out there, they take your word and they invest in this opportunity. I hope that they follow Sally's 8-point plan, and I really hope that they see the need, as Marissa is doing, to work both internally and externally, because it really will require collective action in the fashion sector and beyond to meet this moment. So we have exactly come out of time, and real pleasure to each of you and to everybody for joining. Thank you again to the Global Fashion Agenda, and real pleasure for this Copenhagen Fashion Summits 2020 session. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Pleasure. Bye-bye now.
Alt ser fint ud hos dig, Nicolaj. Bare lige.
Tak.
Morten, vi har ikke Stine inde. Jeg ved ikke, om hun mangler at blive lukket ind.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Hi, Nicolaj.
Hi, Stine. Welcome, everyone. It's kind of weird hosting a conversation like this on Zoom, but I mean, I still haven't quite gotten used to it. So, but anyway, my name is Nicolaj Reffstrup. I'm the founder of Ganni, a Copenhagen-based contemporary fashion label. And I'm here with Stine, Kirstein, Junge, that heads up the SDG Accelerator program at the UNDP. Welcome to you, Stine.
Yeah, hi.
And as you guys probably know, it's a no moderator conversation, so it's a new format for all of us. So please bear with us if we make mistakes. I mean, there's no one to save us here, and I cannot even kick Stine under the table if things go wrong. So we're not in the same office. Good thing though is that there's no one to stop us if we go over time. Anyway, we're planning for our chat to go on for 20 minutes, after which hopefully we should have around 10 minutes for questions and comments. So please submit questions or comments in the comment section during the session, and then one of our colleagues will pick a few questions for us to answer by the end. Real quick, to provide a bit of context, I'll just run you through a presentation of the case, and I'm actually reading this from my notes. So Ganni and the UNDP set out to create an impact-free collection. I'll get back to what that means. Fast forwarding the mapping of Ganni's supply chain and fabric choices in order to make radical change. We created the Ganni Lab project, a virtual team with team members from literally all parts of our organization that ran as a cross-departmental project for 12 months. All right, okay, let's get started, Stine. Could you, for a start, explain to us what the SDG Accelerator program is and how businesses can benefit from structuring their responsibility work around the SDGs?
Yes, I can. So I'll quickly introduce you to the program. The SDG Accelerator for SMEs is a new business innovation program in UNDP that has been developed and tested over the last 2 years with 32 small and medium-sized industrial companies from Denmark. So what we do in this program is that we provide a structured process to companies to work with the SDGs as strategic goals to grow their business. And when the companies have they end up with a solid business plan ready for implementation. So the SDG Accelerator goes on corporate social responsibility and the classic risk reduction and compliance agenda. Instead, we see it as an export catalog for companies, and we approach the SDGs as market opportunities. So why do we do that? That's because the SDGs, as we see them, are a formulation of greatest challenges of our time, and this is also where we see the greatest needs of our time. So this is also where we need solutions. And who are good at coming up with solutions? That's the private sector, and especially small and medium-sized enterprises, because they are agile, they are innovative, and many of them are also very tech-savvy. So we're here to present or to discuss the case of Ganni. So I'll ask you, Nicolaj, now, how did Ganni work specifically with SDG goal number 12 to achieve responsible consumption and production in this project?
Well, as we all know, supply chains are historically long and complex and super opaque. I mean, production takes place across multiple countries, and only few people really understand the true impact of that production. And that goes for us as well. So for a start, it was super important for us to set up this cross-departmental team that would map out and at least try to understand our own processes. But at the same time, we also wanted to expand our sense of ownership and educate everyone across departments. So it's about making our responsibility work an inherent part of how we do business. It has to be something you default to, not just a nice add-on or something that sits in a single department. So it kind of reminds me of how IT was 20 years ago. Back then you had these huge IT departments that would create and lead all tech projects, and you would go to them for help. But today, digitization has become an inherent part of all departments. It's imminent in what you do. So you wouldn't do anything in marketing or logistics or finance without considering how to digitize that process or problem. So we're trying to make the same thing happen for our responsibility effort, if that makes sense.
So actually, what Ganni has done is exactly what the SDG Accelerator has aimed for. So with establishing the Ganni Lab, Ganni has actually started a process of anchoring the SDGs at the core of their business and in the future strategy of their business. And that demands cooperation between different units. So when I work with Ganni, I work with people from design, production, communications, sustainability, and leadership. So it also demands a cooperation with the supply chain and many actors from the supply chain. So Ganni did not limit themselves to and their sustainability work with us to the sustainability unit. They went far beyond, and that can create a huge and truly transformational process in terms of working with sustainability. But now we talk about sustainable production and consumption level. I can't help asking you, how does Ganni handle the massive and growing pile of fashion waste and stock that ends up in landfills and is getting burnt?
Oh, I wish you hadn't asked that question. No, just kidding. Of course, it's a huge problem. And especially when you, as we do, acknowledge that you are a fashion brand. Like we create collections that don't just satisfy a functional need, like a basic piece of garment. What we do is also kind of cater for people's needs for aesthetically pleasing designs. It's raw consumption, basically. So that's why, at least hypothetically, we set out to create a fashion collection that left very little impact. It's easier with basics, but only if we manage to also create a fashion collection that does no harm or very, very little harm can we achieve full impact. We have a long way to go, and obviously to get there, you need to also consider how your product is consumed, as you were talking about here, and obviously where it ends up. So at Ganni, we're looking at 4 different strategies for that part of our business. So we have a take-back scheme that's already been implemented in most of our stores, where customers can return clothes that we then treat responsibly. We have launched Ganni Repeat, rental program that we are still tweaking to figure out what exactly does the customer need. We have a Designing for Circularity program going on, and we're exploring repair guarantee programs and other programs to ensure that we extend the lifetime of a product and to optimize the ways that we can recycle that product in the end. And then finally, obviously, we're also exploring re-commerce solutions where Ganni will either own the full resale process or facilitate a peer-to-peer transaction. So as I said, we still have a long way to go, but at least it shows that there are commercially viable solutions out there, which is super important because in some of these cases, it seems that the consumer is interested in engaging and actually paying for this, especially re-commerce. They might just be there for a bargain on price, but that's totally fine with us. Because we know that if you pass on a dress to be worn by another person for another 9 months, then the impact of that product or garment is reduced by 30%. So whatever reason the consumer might have to buy that, it's cool with us. That's tangible change. So anyway, now we talk about change. Let's get back to the accelerator program. So the UNDP created the SDG Accelerator program as an accelerator program to create change, basically. So could you describe for us what goes into that process and why do we talk about a sprint process? And especially, or most importantly, maybe, how do you ensure that it's not just words here?
Thank you for coming back on my question so thoroughly. I'll try to come back equally fine on this one. So I'll elevate myself a little bit and just say that as an overall, the SDG Accelerator for SME has 3 key components. So we do have the business innovation journey, and we do have the employee engagement component. And then we have a component called external communication, which is about communicating the company cases in traditional media and social media. So the business innovation journey is the most heavyweight component of the program, and we are working with management consultants to actually implement. And in the Danish case, we work with Monitor Deloitte. And we do that because this is not just talk. We need to work with the consultants that are able to develop a business. UNDP can't do that. I'll come back to that. So in the short term, the key objective with this innovation journey is the company use the model and the tools in the program, and then they create a minimum of 1 product, 1 service, or 1 business model that have some significant impact on the sustainable development goals. So we have some results, and I'll just share a little bit of them here. Again, emphasizing that this is not just words, but real results. So in 2018, we had 13 companies graduating, and 1/3 of these companies developed a prototype and sold it while we worked with them. I find that pretty amazing. Then
very cool.
The next third of the companies, they developed a prototype while we worked with them, and then the last 1/3 of the companies, they developed a solid business plan ready for implementation. So, as I mentioned before, the management consultants in the program to the commercial viability of the sustainable products and services that we are developing in the program. UNDP contribute with our knowledge in the program, we actually created a structure for external communications, and by doing that, we are applying pressure on the companies to actually pull through on the commitments they've made with us in the program. And it really worked because you do have these external expectations put on the companies and also accountability demands, and it really made the companies work. So some of the features worked in the program. Of course, there were also some features that didn't, but this is also a pilot, so we picked up and learned. So talking about results, Nicolaj, what were the results of working with the Ganni Lab project in the SDG Accelerator, and how did you quantify these results?
Well, I totally recognize what you're talking about. Like a lot of the gain from a project like this you get from just putting objectives out there and being transparent about you too, and through that you kind of commit to a process. But if I kind of take one step back, then the idea for Ganni Lab came partly from Vattenfall, a Swedish company that produces green energy. So Vattenfall set out to build a carbon neutral baby crib, which is a pretty random product for them, but they just used this to serve as a case for them. So they went to extremes to get there, and in the end found that the production cost of that baby crib would be around $28,000 or something like that.
Oh my
but
God.
It would be carbon neutral. So inspired by that, partly inspired by that, we too wanted to create an impact neutral fashion collection at whatever cost, at least hypothetically. The bad thing is we didn't succeed in that, unfortunately, but I don't think at the moment it's possible at all. Good thing though is that we learned a lot through the process and found that most of those learnings kind of transitioned into our day-to-day business right away. It was kind of seamless actually, and probably because we had so many representatives from across the organization. So we focused on cotton, viscose, and polyesters as these are our kind of biggest volume fabrics. And then we decided to only use market-ready fabrics as they could be scaled right away. So as a result, we went from just 4% responsible fabrics when we started out to close to 73% in our latest spring-summer 21 collection, which is just over a 12 months process. So, and in the process, we also prioritized traceability. So we reached 75% traceability, which is kind of a weird concept to me at least, but that means that we got to the raw material stage. However, it was difficult getting further than that, especially working with recycled materials. It can be tough. And to kind of verify this and track it, we work with Quantis, which is a life cycle assessment provider. They kind of measured and validated our carbon footprint and all the data and the improvements we made. So it's important when you engage with a project like this that you make yourself aware that this is going to cost you money. I mean, there's no free ride or free lunch, and you cannot pass the cost on to the consumer. She's not ready to pay a premium yet. So, for instance, we found that responsible fabrics are typically 8 to 10% more expensive than conventional ones, but sometimes up to 3 times the cost of a conventional fabric if you want to use like very innovative, super interesting new materials. But else than that, we also spend a lot of money on workshops, courses, software tools, the team, certifications, consultants, etc. We work directly with 11 different suppliers, and we probably spent more than 150,000 euro just kind of in direct expenses, and add to that the salaries and a bit of capex. So it's not a free ride. Anyway, we're kind of running out of time, so I'll jump to my last question for you, and that's about the SMEs. So why did the UNDP decide to engage in the accelerator program with the SMEs and not the big guys?
Yeah, so we engage with the SMEs because the large companies, they are already engaged in this agenda and they do have much more resources than SMEs. So SMEs need support. And also SMEs, they constitute 90% of all companies in the world, even more. And they play a very critical role in terms of creating jobs and livelihoods. And of course, that matters a lot to UNDP. And it also matters a lot if you want to reach the SDGs by 2030. So this program is for SMEs. And then there is another thing that's key to UNDP when we work with SMEs, and that is to create open source SDG business solutions that have a systemic impact. And that means that the solutions that companies are creating can be implemented by, across the entire sector, and it just doesn't matter only for one company. So that's why open sourcing is so important to accelerate change, and that is something that the Ganni Lab will also do. It will share open source, hopefully to spread across the sector. So third point is that UNDP has done a pilot with the SDG accelerator, and when UNDP does like that, or make pilots. We want to scale. And we're present in 170 countries and territories in the world. And there has been a great level of interest from our country offices and governments around the world. So at the moment, we're rolling out globally and have a pilot in Moldova and one in Bosnia. And we're building one in Q8. And there's a lot of more interest in our team, sector-specific accelerator coming up in Denmark in 2021. So, and then I want to finish off by saying that I really want to encourage you guys to come to us if you want to do an SDG accelerator in your own country or in your own industry. For example, the fashion industry, and Nicolaj and I, we see great potential in that.
I love that, Stine. That's super cool. I guess that just to encourage everyone out there, guys, if you'd like the UN Accelerator program to come to your country, please reach out to Stine directly and explain to her why she should prioritize your country right away. It's super cool, and I think it would be extremely helpful for a lot of like small and mid-sized companies to get started on the process, getting like the blue stamp from the UN, but also access to some of the resources you guys have. Okay, we're slowly running out of time, but before we jump to a few of the questions we've had, we should probably just sum up the key takeaways from our conversation. You still have time to submit more questions or comments if you want to, so please shoot. Stine, will you have a go at the first one?
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen now. Just a second, because I think you guys should have the takeaways. Should we put them up? Did I share them now? Can you see them?
I'm not seeing anything so far.
No. Okay, but let me look at the questions then. So, let me see. Maybe, is there a question at all?
Oh yeah, there are a question from Danielle.
Okay, maybe you can read it out.
I can do that for sure. Which team department undergoes the biggest transformation during the process towards more sustainability? Which department worked most intensely on reaching your goals? Very good question.
Yeah, it's a good question, and if it's directly for Ganni, I think you're the one to answer. But because it's actually been very different departments in the different companies in the program that have carried out the last of the work. Most all companies leading the program, they have and I think people have the hardcore experience with this from within Ganni.
Yeah, see, I'm afraid we have a little bit of a problem with your sound sometimes. So I'll no worries. I'll try to answer it. So as mentioned, I think it's extremely important to kind of gather all stakeholders in the process, internal stakeholders. So we had representatives from literally all departments. However, having said that, I think production sourcing still bears the bulk of the grundle, along with the responsibility team, obviously, because there's a lot of firstly, because more than 80% of our carbon footprint, for instance, is derived from the actual product, like 2/3 directly from the fabric. Sorry, 80% from the product. Now you're on the screen, and more than 2/3 from the actual fabric. So there's a lot of work that goes on to working directly with your suppliers and identifying fabrics that makes sense. There's also a lot of work that goes into mapping and validating the data, and so obviously also the responsibility department has a huge job ahead of them. But having said that, in a fashion company, obviously everything starts with the design team. So if they aren't trained at kind of designing for circularity, and if they aren't involved very, very early on in the process, you kind of get nowhere. So they need to be extremely involved in the process also. So my key takeaway would be that those 3 teams would bear the bulk of the work load here. All right, we have the 5 key takeaways here on the slide that Stine just shared. Would you go through the first one then?
Yes, so first key takeaway is that we recommend that you structure your work around the SDGs. They are a worldwide acknowledged language and a framework or system to work with.
Got it. And key takeaway number 2 is like, from my point of view, like, thoroughly map your supply chain to truly understand where you have the biggest challenges, but also where you can make the biggest impact for the least investment, because we're busy. Like, we need to go for the low-hanging fruits, all of us. And on top of that, create virtual teams that work across departments to make sure that knowledge diffuses throughout the entire organization seamlessly. I can also add to the next one, key takeaway number 3, if you get the chance, if the accelerator program should come to your country, use it as an opportunity to facilitate change and apply pressure on yourself through external commitments, as both Stine and I talked about earlier on. And then key takeaway number 4, which is also close to my heart, you need to be willing to invest, because companies that dive into sustainability need to pay. Like, don't wait for the consumer to pick up the tab.
And then the final number 5 key takeaway is that we recommend that you make your work open source to create learning and transparency in the entire industry, and especially between small and medium-sized enterprises, as this is exactly where you can make the biggest impact. Do we have time for more questions, or?
Yeah, we should have time for a couple more questions. So
lovely.
There's a question on where can we see the results of your product or the product in your current collections. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we actually wanted to create one collection that was impact-free. However, it turned out that a lot of the learnings from the process kind of diffused into the rest of the organization and became part of our day-to-day operations quite fast. So it didn't make sense in the end. But what you can see is that for instance, we just launched our software collection, which is a jersey leisure wear collection. It's a new category for us. And the fabric source for this project came directly from Ganni Lab, from the Ganni Lab project. It's made from 100% recycled materials. As I mentioned before, we reached 75% traceability across this collection. So it was just great to see that we could take the knowledge that we gained over the course of the Ganni Lab project or the accelerator program, extracted it from that process and implemented it directly in the way we do business. So that's one example. And overall, as I mentioned, currently we are at 75% of our collection that's or the fabrics we use that are certified or either organic or recycled. So that's one example. There's a question also on where and how can I contact the SDG Accelerator Program?
Yes.
Good question.
Yeah, so we have a webpage. It's called sdg-accelerator.org. And you can also contact me. My name and phone number, email, etc. is on the web. Or reach out to Nicolaj. He's in contact with us as well.
DM me, yeah.
I will put, yeah, I don't know if I could share with everybody here. I don't think I can.
All right, we have time for one more question, and I think the most important one is that, or it's a combination of 2 questions. What is an impact-free collection? Is it actually achievable, or was it more of a marketing statement? So impact-free, I think it's up to you to kind of define what it is, what it means for you. So in our case, as I mentioned, or as we talked about earlier on, we prioritized 3 SDGs, number 5, gender equality, number 12, which is responsible production and consumption, and number 13, which is climate action. So when we define what impact-free means to us, we would kind of center those objectives around those 3 SDGs. However, impact-free was an internal kind of working title for us. It was more of a hypothesis that we could work towards. It was a big ambition that we all knew we probably wouldn't achieve. So no, it was definitely not a marketing statement. It was never meant to be mentioned externally. I hope that answers that question. And no, I'm afraid not at the moment. For a fashion product, I don't think it's actually achievable. It might be for a basic product, like a basic tee, but for fashion product, we still got quite a way to go. But there's a lot of super innovative product popping up at the moment, from like circular systems or Evernew, and like please do follow all of those super dynamic startups that are developing progressive new materials. The whole new material science is a super exciting field at the moment.
I can add to what Nicolaj said. So just one comment, because we had several dialogues around this, and I think Nicolaj put it quite well one day when he said that doing the Ganni lab and within this program was actually creating in Ganni that you don't have because you're an SME and doesn't have that type of resources. So I think that was one of the or created there.
That's a good wrap up. To cut it short, we use the SDG Accelerator program as your outsourced R&D department. If you can't, like, if you don't have the internal resources, which we didn't have. All right, time's up. Although we don't have a moderator, we still need to get going. Thank you so much for participating, Stine, and thank you to Copenhagen Fashion Summit for hosting us. It's been a real pleasure. And please, guys out there, feel free to reach out to Stine or me if you have any questions. That's all.
So,
Thanks,
thank
guys.
you for today. Hi.
Bye-bye.